Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The silver light shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us on our affiliate, the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you joining us on YouTube, we welcome you in. As always, a quick shout out to our sponsor, at Affinity Writing and Editing Services, at Affinity WES. You can reach them on Twitter, you can reach them on Facebook. For anything you need, they can, for as far as writing goes, they can help you out with it. As a matter of fact, the people over at Affinity Writing and Editing Services would probably have been most interested to find out what I did this week. A while ago, when I first rebooted this show and brought it back up, I was talking about the capitalist reset that was proposed by Prince Charles and some other people. Prince Charles, who is not exactly known for his common touch and has been a very controversial individual, announced that he had this fantastic new plan, and he was going to announce it in the new year, 2021. January 1st, 2021, he would be announcing this project. And I'm sure when I mentioned it, a lot of people sat back there and said, "Oh, Silverlight. It's crazy Uncle Silverlight again, getting into that silver whiskey of his." But no, I was stone cold sober. And in amongst this chaos that we're going through of continuing pandemic, of the election debacle of who is going to be president, one of the three candidates. Because remember, Nancy Pelosi has still not been ruled out as being president until Mr. Trump concedes or drops his lawsuits. That is exactly how it's going to work out. We're in for a crazy 2021, everybody, and we're just starting to detail it. If at any time during this show you have any questions, please feel free to contact us on Twitter at Silverlight Live. That's Twitter at Silverlight Live. Because I'm pretty sure people are going to have a lot of questions, and I'm trying to fill this story in to let you know what's going on ahead of time. Back to basics. Prince Charles and several people who are infamous for their affiliations and connections, because of course they're all members of the Bilderberg Group. This is not an official Bilderberg project, but it's always funny how the same people, the same ideas get recycled over and over again. I don't mention this name very often, but I find it interesting how often Zbigniew Brzezinski's name comes up when it comes to anything to do with the White House. He's an interesting man who has served for decades now for both Republican and for Democratic presidents. Prince Charles is kind of the same. It's always interesting to see what company he and his family keep. Because remember, while they are the British royal family, they're also the House of Saxe-Gotha. That's right, Gotha, the town in Germany. Gotha, the weapons manufacturer who made the first biplanes that raided Britain during World War I. This is before the Blitz of World War II, but it's the same family on both sides of the same war, World War I and World War II. Gotha, or Saxe-Gotha, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha is really the royal family's full name, last name. They were all German, because the royal family is German. Now, of course, during World War I, partially to keep negative attention off of them, and partially to boost homeland morale and support, they changed their last name to Windsor. After all, it's just a royal dynasty, no one pays attention to such things. But they just casually changed their last name in the middle of a world war so they could make it seem what side they were on. Prince Charles, whose I'm going to describe it as a peculiar situation. The Queen is really getting up there in years, and I'm quite frankly surprised she hasn't retired, or abdicated as they call it in royal circles. But Prince Charles will be in an interesting position because there was talk about skipping him entirely. Now, since the Prince Harry fiasco and whatever went on there, which I'm not interested enough in the royal family to detail that just yet, but until then, the Queen was saying she might be willing to skip a generation and hand the power on to William or Harry directly. Now, all of a sudden, Charles is coming out of the woodwork trying to cement his position in the limelight. He has this massive plan he is the figurehead for. Yeah, Prince Charles, the British people, the British Empire. Not the whole world wants to go along with anything at all promoted by the British Empire, unless you realize that there's a lot of quiet people signed on behind. Now I ask you this question: if it's a plan and it's not going to be announced until 2021, how can they have multiple pages of backers? And I will be including the link to their backers in the thumbnail of this video, because I want you to do your own research. I want you to question everything on the internet that you hear. Not because I want you to be paranoid, but do not accept the status quo. They might not be purposely lying to you, but people repeat an awful lot of stuff that's not true. Look at your big social media applications and you can post almost anything as a fact, and people will repost it if it suits their belief structure, or if it makes them laugh. The question is, which is which? There are a number of trolls out there, but unfortunately one person posts the wrong thing on social media and it can run like wildfire. Back to the topic at hand. So, what Prince Charles has proposed is that since we're going through a pandemic, and keep in mind, he knew this back in May. He had this all in place back in May. He had his backers, everything ready to go. Even before that, when I first touched on this way back then, he was a man with a plan ready to go. That shows at the highest level, people knew we weren't getting out of this quickly. And not people like you and I. Well, my listeners are the best listeners on the planet, so you guys probably caught on to it. But the great and the powerful gathered together and decided this pandemic was going to go on. And now, today, Justin Trudeau, in all this news about the pandemic and the presidential election and everything, quietly slips out that he's interested in Canada signing on to this reset of capitalism. And this is when you know to pay attention to news, when they make a major announcement and try to sneak it in at big critical times, you know it's important. Going back to September 11th, 2001, the day before, the Pentagon announced that it had lost $5 billion. We know they didn't lose it. We know they spent it on some sort of a black project or gave it over to some dictator to do something. There's 10,000 ways that money could have gone missing. And the day after, the September 11th attacks hit. I'm not saying they knew what was coming, because when my live show starts, it's actually my intention to interview an individual who has a very unique perspective on that, but I'm saying it's awfully funny how that happened. And now that we're in the middle of a worldwide crisis, you can debate the reality of the crisis all that you like. I will not hold it against you if you say COVID is fake. I do not judge anybody whose family has lost a family member to COVID. A lot of the times I try to stay very neutral in my judgments. I have them. I have people I like. I have people I dislike. I've tried to take that out of this program and present facts as I find them. Like I said, Trudeau coming out today and on the news endorsing this reset of capitalism is pretty big news. Now, it's not really big news in the sense that Canada does tend to go along with whatever the United States and Britain go along with. But it is big news, because another quiet bit of news that came out today is China, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, and about 15 countries, South Korea, Japan, have all signed an economic bloc treaty, much like that of the European Union. Now, there's no idea that they're all going to merge together and become a super country like the European Union did. That's not in the cards. But China has leveraged themselves into a position where they're the leading member in a very influential trading bloc with an incredible amount of resources. Australia doesn't have a lot as far as agriculture and food goes. It is a fully capable country, but it offers minerals. It offers a lot of rare earth resources. Indonesia, Micronesia, the Philippines, that whole Sea of China region has a ton of oil. China, we know, has a manufacturing base that is staggering what they can accomplish. Personal anecdote, I had to do a pretty major function, 4 days long, and we had to get things made up, pencils, pens, notepads, etc. For us to get the stuff locally would have taken months. For us to order it from China, they were going to be able to have it on our desk the next week at 1/10 the price. Now, this is always when I start to smell something strange. Why is it possible for them to produce something so much cheaper than I can get it done locally? It should not be possible. I should be able to go to my neighbor who's pretty good with cars and say, hey, can you fix my car cheaper than I should be able to get the parts from China, put them in, or even send my car to China and get it fixed over there. The fact is, it's not cheaper. And I believe this is probably one of the things that Prince Charles, although he probably would have gone along with it, but Justin Trudeau and all the other signatories to this they call it a reset of capitalism, but my word for it is a little more crude. I'm going to leave that off the radio. I don't particularly feel like getting censored today. We'll see about tomorrow, but not today. So what is involved in rebooting, resetting, reworking capitalism? What is Capitalism 2.0? They talk about a fourth industrial revolution, which we're in the middle of. Instead of before, where people came out and got together, worked hard, put together a company, and built it from there, we're now at a situation where people can become instant millionaires if you get just the right combination. Is it easy? No, but neither's opening a restaurant. McDonald's wasn't built in a day. Kentucky Fried Chicken wasn't built in a day. Popeyes didn't open 100 locations at first. It's a long, hard process. But the interesting thing about this capitalist reset idea is they want it done by 2030. That's right. In 10 years, they want to reset everything on the planet. And it's not going to be in your best interest. How can I say it's not going to be in your best interest? Oh, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Of course, the first thing that they do is they hang out that wonderful shingle that says economic redistribution. Yeah, they're planning on redistributing resources. Now, some people are going to jump at this right away and say communism. And I understand that point of view. But it's not going to be about communism. It's going to be a capitalist redistribution of resources. For those of you who lived through the 1980s, you might remember the trickle-down economic theory that was proposed, and it was promulgated by Ronald Reagan and a number of very important people. The idea is if the rich make a lot of money, they spend more money, and it trickles down to us. Wonderful idea. in theory, it should work. If I give somebody more money, they're going to have money for a bigger TV, for a nicer car, etc. But the rich do not think the same way we do. You ever notice that people that win the lottery, sports stars that make it big, you look at them 10 years in the future and the vast majority of them go broke. That's because they don't know how to play the rich man's game. The rich people play at a different level. I keep saying there's two different economies. They're not going to reset their own economy. Their economy's doing great. It's our economy that's screwed. Just for context, I've been playing around for a bit trying to find unemployment numbers. Supposedly, we've gone from 10% unemployment in North America, and over the past couple months it's dropped to 9.5%. Fantastic. Somehow through this lockdown, through everybody that knows everybody staying at home, they've lowered the unemployment rate. Interesting trick. And so I've been looking around for a while to try to figure out what the real unemployment numbers are. I couldn't get them because, of course, everybody knows the unemployment numbers are doctored. They drop people who are not looking for jobs anymore. I've always wondered how they qualify that. And what they said is, since May, 1 in 3 people in the United States and Canada have applied for unemployment insurance, the benefit programs, all those things. That shows that the employment problem is about 33% instead of 10%. So they're already lying to us by a factor of 3. And that's just on the unemployment numbers. So the 33% unemployment ratio puts us in Great Depression numbers. Looking back on that 1920s and 1930s period, we have an interesting, shall we say, parallel to what we're going through now. The Spanish flu erupted in about 1920. Well, 1918 to 1920. And it was really horrible. It killed a lot of people. They didn't have medicine at all like we have now. Or even the techniques to care for the people that had the flu. They were just all stuck in tents and rooms, and nurses would go up and down and try not to get coughed on. And hopefully your immune system was strong enough. But what this meant back in 1920 was labor became more valuable. There's a sentence you haven't heard uttered in a while. Labor became more valuable. Because fewer people were able to work, their wages went up because every employer wanted good workers. Workers at this time figured out pretty much the basic thing you need to know. There's 3 possibilities to get what you want. There's fame, there's power, and there's money. Now, workers don't have power, they don't have money, and they don't have fame. But when they work together and they unionize, which for some reason union has become a bad word, but it means to do as one. And because of that, they were able to take some pretty shady operators who were trying to pay them bare minimum and take away their salaries and say, hey, we're good workers, we deserve more of the money. This applies to sports as well. You always hear people talk about athletes who are getting paid tens and 20 millions of dollars a year to throw a ball, to kick a ball, to whatever that they're going to do. But I don't begrudge them that. This is how a union is actually supposed to work. The next time you hear about a Patrick Mahomes signing a $500 million deal over 10 years, remember, the league makes about $32 billion per year. So his contract over 10 years is barely anything compared to what the league itself makes. Don't think this doesn't apply to you as well. As always, well, not as always, but I keep an eye on the job market. And jobs for the same companies for last year. This year, they've completely changed the salary packages. There's one company I've kind of been watching because I'm not going to say their name. They're relatively local. You probably haven't heard of them. But last year, the position they were advertising for $45,000 to $55,000 a year is now down to $16 an hour. So all of a sudden, they're about $32,000 a year, assuming you get 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. The other interesting thing is they've made it hourly. And this is a management position. This isn't somebody who's going to be on the floor sweeping up nails or something. These are managers they're trying to sign to hourly contracts. While that might work at a coffee shop or a retail establishment, anytime you start to deal with something above that, you really need to have salaried managers. The reason is overtime is expected. If you're lucky, you can have an 8-hour day, and I've kind of been the master of 8-hour days. I will stay, absolutely, when there's a problem and sort it out. I don't just drop and look at the clock and say 5 o'clock I'm going. No, I push myself all day to make sure by the end of the day, either I'm in a position to finish, or I know that my overtime is going to be limited. And I have done heaps of overtime in my life. But this is not the atmosphere, the economic climate for overtime. Been casually talking to friends of mine in various fields, and there is overtime there, but it's nothing close to what it was even a year ago. And that's because the supply chain is functioning, but it's kind of like removing a couple quarts of blood from your own system. Your blood will still pump, but it's going to do you no good. And that's what our economy is doing. The blood has come out of it. And it's gone to the uber rich. Not the 1%, but I'd say the 10% are profiting severely off this. I'm not talking doctors, I'm not talking lawyers. Well, maybe some lawyers in this, but I'm talking the really, really big players. People like Bloomberg, Blackstone Group, Bill and Melinda Gates. Yes, the owners of Microsoft. Microsoft is still relevant. This is actually being recorded on a Microsoft product. At the beginning, I used to record my show on an Android, and things changed, so the sound quality is a little bit superior on this. That's why I'm here. But that's also why I got into looking into this magic economic reset, because in the 1920s, when they had their pandemic and they got out of it, they had 10 really good years and then went into a solid depression. And that's history. For 10 years, the money was there to burn. It flowed about. And the flow of money is really what capitalism is about. Money needs to flow. The capital, I shouldn't say money, it's capital. The resources need to be able to flow through the system. People need to have access to resources in order to make more resources. Let's take a burger joint. You need to take money in the till so that you can have money. The way that you take money in the till is you tell your customer, hey, I got a burger. And the customer says, I'd like a burger. Here's $1 for your burger. I don't know if there's a dollar menu in your area. I'm just going to pretend for the sake of this example. So for $1, you give them the burger. It costs you 50 cents to make that burger. So you put 50 cents in your pocket. And that's the way commerce theoretically goes. But that money keeps having to come in. You have to keep buying the patties. You have to keep buying the buns. You have to keep that person behind the counter, flipping those hamburgers, putting fries together, whatever you want to do. All those things have to go. And these cycles are what are called supply chains. If you don't have a burger, you can't sell it to the customer. You have no capital coming in. If the customer is not interested in your burger, you have no capital coming in. It's a continual cycle that rotates over and over. And that is what we're based on. All these little cycles that drive bigger cogs and bigger cogs till you get to the big ones at the top. And those cogs churn the next level, which doesn't slow down. That stuff doesn't trickle down. Stuff trickles up. It defies gravity. Gravity is a law, but our economics defy the law. Yet, magically, Prince Charles, who's had his whole life, in May of this year, apparently had a revelation. He said, I can fix all this. I can redistribute the wealth. Everybody's going to magically be prosperous. We can all sing Kumbaya, and everybody fades into the sunset at like the end of a happy movie. The economy does not work like that, and it can't work like that. If you had a dictator like a Stalin or a Mussolini or a Mao or the Kim family, they would be hard-pressed to drag a country out of this situation. And all of those dictators that I mentioned could literally snap their fingers and make whatever they wanted a reality, sooner or later. They are not, those countries are not in the same position as they were, except for North Korea. And they're able to maintain their little island nation state, whatever you want to call it. I call it an island nation state because it might as well exist on an island. It's not connected to anything. But they're doing not so bad compared to their usual selves. And I'm sure they're suffering just as badly from the pandemic. But the difference is they can show a good face to the world. They can still get whatever food they can to their people, which is not much. I do actually watch military parades, just a vestige of me being a veteran. And the North Korean military parades just look so Soviet. Sorry, it's not meant to be an insult. It reminds me so much where everybody's in perfect formation, saluting as they walk by the stand. Yeah. But the same token, when you look at a U.S. military parade, a Canadian military parade, a British, a German, whatever you say it, they look very different. Instead of being in, well, even when they're in their perfect uniforms and perfect everything, just look at the people. You're going to get a different kind of soldier in Germany, in Canada, in the United States than you do in North Korea. And that's because North Korea's systems never worked properly in the first place. Whereas Canada, Britain, the United States, all these people, they have some fat soldiers, they have some thin soldiers, they have some big soldiers. But North Korea, it's a wonderful parade because they all look precisely like they should. Marching in file, identical. This is what a military formation should look like. I don't like what it's being used for, but I try not to blame soldiers because soldiers don't really have a choice what they're going to do. The difference is North Korea is able to hide all these problems. The people are used to not having much food. They're all skinny and waifish, and yes, I'm sure that makes them healthy in some respects, but there's probably nutritional deficiencies. But the people are used to living with that. In the Western world, the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, weird countries, and I emphasize again, that's what they call us, weird. Academic circles call us weird because we are weird in a world stage. Generally speaking, you have a big chief hierarchy where there's one big man who dictates whatever happens. And that's held true for most of human history. Democracy does exist, and it pokes its head up once in a while, but generally speaking, you got a person in charge with all the power. He gets all the silly putty, and he gets to play with it the way that he wants. And yes, I said he. There have been women rulers in history, but by far and large, it's mostly been male rulers. Back to this reboot, though, even if the most mighty rulers that have existed would have difficulty pulling themselves out of the pandemic, it's a lot harder in industrialized, educated countries that are used to a rich standard of living. How many people do you know at the moment that are sitting at home in one way or another? Quite a few. I wish it was not the case, but quite a few. You go to the malls and, yes, you can buy stuff, but you're only allowed in a couple at a time. This was always what they made fun of the Soviet Union for, was that everybody was lining up waiting to make their purchases, because the Soviet Union always had currency. It didn't flow the same way that capitalist currency flowed, but the so-called communism of the Soviet era, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was not communism. It was a totalitarian state, and people could buy stuff. You would wait in line with your rubles and your ration card and get your loaf of bread, get your eggs, whatever it was that you were getting. And then you go line up the next place to get your toilet paper, to get your writing paper, and then the next place and the next place. What's the old joke? What's 10 miles long and eats only potatoes? The Soviet lineup to pick up meat. And that's really the way it was. When the Soviets first visited London, and they saw that people were going around with bread and eggs and milk and stuff like that, they asked, how do you guys plan for all this? And the answer was, we don't plan for this. And that's been how our economy has run for the past couple hundred years. We don't really plan for it. We've been going mostly by supply and demand. Everybody likes Coke. I pick on Coke on this show because pretty much everybody that I'm speaking to has had a Coca-Cola product in their life at least one time. Can't say that about many things, but I can say that about Coke. Now, Coke just needs to know what were last month's sales numbers. We sold 10 billion cans of Coke. That's a made-up number. Okay, so we know we need to make at least 10 billion cans of Coke for this month. You have leftover, then you throttle back production a little. You have more than you have more orders coming in, you speed up production, you try to get it going faster. It's all very laissez-faire, which means do as thou will. Coke could at any moment turn around and say, right, we're only going to make 5 billion units of Coke, and that way people are going to be lining up to try to get the last Coke that's there. It's called monopoly marketing. There's laws against it, but it doesn't stop companies from doing it. And indeed, when I'm looking at the companies that have signed on to this capitalist restart plan, I smell something really fishy. One of the biggest names that popped out to me in this was Bayer. Yes, Bayer, the aspirin people. They've been around since the 1800s, manufacturing, of course, aspirin. They manufactured morphine that was advertised as a non-addictive pain reducer. Remember, at the time, opium was the alternative, and morphine is less addictive than opium, although individuals always vary and studies always vary. But that's what we're dealing with in Bayer. Now, like I said, look at the link I'm going to include in the thumbnail. Bayer has signed on to this capitalist reset program, whatever it is. There's no information on this. I've been able to glean little bits here and there, but their official website doesn't list anything. But it has an alphabetical list of hundreds, if not thousands, of partners. I only gave a quick scan in, but Bayer really stood out to me. You see, Bayer has a very interesting history. In the 1930s, they merged up to form IG Farben. Bayer and IG Farben are both German companies. Now, we know in the 20s and 30s, Germany went through some very difficult times. And in fact, when the war ended, I have no choice. I'm going to have to read this directly. And it's painful for me to read. This does not give me any pleasure, but this is reality. IG Farben, working out of Auschwitz, the concentration camp, they were doing human experiments. And this is a real letter that they wrote to Rudolf Höss, who was the Auschwitz commandant. The transport of 150 women arrived in good condition. However, we were unable to obtain conclusive results because they died during the experiments. We would kindly request that you send us another group at the same number and at the same price. Yes, in Nazi Germany, the prison camps were buying men, women, and children from one another. And this was from IG Farben, Bayer Group. We know Bayer is still here today. And they've signed on to this capitalist redistribution, reset, reboot, whatever you want to call it, program. After World War II, IG Farben was broken up. And it broke up into Bayer, it broke up into, BASF, and a few other companies. Now, the interesting thing is both Bayer and BASF have signed on for this capitalist reset. Now, you may be thinking, Silverlight, it's been 80 years. Of course, the two companies have gone their own different ways. No, they haven't. Despite the fact that the Allies broke them up because of their direct contribution to war crimes, they're still Nazi companies. That's how I'm going to say it. There was a gentleman named Fritz Mayer who was an IG Farben director, and he was sentenced to 7 years for crimes. That was during the Nuremberg trials. So 7 years of war crimes. And that was in 1948. He was released in 1950. Imagine that. A gentleman who they have him responsible for ordering humans from one place to another where they would die for a price, served 2 years. And after those 2 years, he was elected chair of Bayer's supervisory board in 1956. And he spent 8 years being on Bayer's supervisory board. Again, the 1960s, you're probably saying Silverlight, that's the 1960s. I wanted to believe that too. As a matter of fact, it seemed like everything calmed down. Of course, certain people are going to be rehabilitated into society, and they might not know what they do. I'm a forgiving kind of guy, but Bayer has struck again pretty recently. You might know everybody's favorite company. Who is it? Monsanto. Guess who Bayer purchased back in 2016? Monsanto, everybody's favorite company that loves to play with genetics, that wants to produce seeds that only sprout one time and don't produce any useful seeds afterward, that spray Roundup weed killer, that have sued individual farmers because their seeds have gone onto their land. Yeah, Monsanto, voted the most evil company in the world, although I think they do have some decent competition there. The fact is, we know they do not have humanity as their first interest. Remember, all companies exist to serve the profit margin, the bottom line, how much they can return to their shareholders at the end of the year. Companies are there to make money. So when I saw this nice big list of all these companies, and very strangely, government institutions, utility companies, and stock markets, I'll get to them in a minute. Let's focus back on Bayer for a minute though. As part of the deal for acquiring Monsanto for $30 billion, Bayer had to sell a significant portion of their agricultural assets to BASF. Remember I just said IG Farben was broken up into Bayer, BASF, and a couple other companies? Yeah, those ties did not go away. And we come to the present day from 2016 to 2020, and both Bayer and BASF have both signed on for their support for this magical capitalist reboot. If this plan was intended to benefit you and I in any way, shape, or form, do you think companies that are doing these shady maneuvers in the background would be saying, yeah, let's get behind this. Let's make sure we're following rules. Let's make sure we are regulated? Of course not. They'd be spending the next 10 years radically trying to diversify their portfolios so that no one would be able to catch them. But before the text is released, before any of us know what's going on, hundreds of companies have signed up already. Nobody signs up for something unless they see the bottom line, but for some reason we in the public aren't allowed to know what these, I'm going to call them superpowers, these superpowered multinational corporate oligarchies know. And believe me, whatever it is, it goes to some weird places. Standard & Poor's Stock Exchange has signed up. The New York Stock Exchange has signed up. Hydro-Quebec, Quebec's power distributor, has signed up. I mean, it's incredible to see who has signed up onto this thing. There's Chinese companies, there's companies from the United Arab Emirates, there's companies based all over the world signing up for this, which, if you remember my broadcast back in September, maybe it was earlier than that, but I said there's no way they're going to get everybody to agree to this. As Silverlight, I feel pretty stupid about saying that right now. But the United Arab Emirates has a few things, and the interesting thing about the United Arab Emirates, they've really reversed a lot of policies this year. I would love to say they've become more liberal, but I just suspect something else is there. They've liberalized their theocratic society, and they're trying to become more Western. They've recognized Israel as a state, and they're suddenly interested in buying United States F-35 fighter jets. The United Arab Emirates sits right next door to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has an ongoing rivalry with Iran. Now, Iran has had a pretty bad shot with this pandemic. They report a lot of infections. That's because where they are, it's not very far from Wuhan, which is where this all began, if you remember. Wuhan province, Wuhan city, China. I might have that wrong. It's a city or a province. I apologize. Wasn't really expecting to go down this road, but that's the fun of doing radio live. At any rate, the disease came from China and is spread over the entire world. But the big government officials, and I'm not necessarily talking who you've elected, but the guys and the girls in the know, the people who are behind the power brokers, have been planning all this out for a long time. Back in May, they were canceling Christmas parades, and now they're turning around and saying, sorry, this Christmas may be canceled. It may have to be a quarantine Christmas. I knew that a long time ago. Go listen to the shows. I've said it before. So I'll say it again. I'm looking at them starting to cancel stuff for next year, and they're already towards June, July of next year. But they have the magic vaccine that's going to come out. Helps 90% of people, which is great because that's kind of the same as the infection rate. It only affects less than 10% of people, so enough about that. I want to get back to the more interesting, the meat of this capitalist reset. So, we know Bayer is on board. We know BASF is on board. We know Hydro-Quebec is on board. There's another interesting name up there. Apple. Yes, the very device some of you are listening to me on. Apple products. Wow, I have to give credit to Alex Jones for some of this research. He is very right-wing, and he does have his moments of delirium, but he's also a pretty good researcher if you learn how to read between the lines. And he was one of the ones that first brought to my attention the conditions that laborers in China go through to manufacture our phones. And there's suicide nets set up to prevent them from jumping to their deaths because they'd rather die than continue working. They're paid worse than a pittance. They're worked for 12, 14 hours a day with very few breaks. I mean, try going 12 hours without a bathroom break. It's nearly impossible. And since the state of China is still in that totalitarian area, that's how I'll say it, they can still whip up, okay, there's what are called free economic zones. For example, Hong Kong would be a free economic zone within China, because they know not to mess with the goose that laid the golden egg. Hong Kong is a great place for investments and banks and all those sort of transactions. Macau, which is nearby, which was in a similar situation to Hong Kong on a 99-year lease to Portugal, is a casino zone. So there you get your prostitutes, your gamblers, your mafia ties. China just declared them a free economic zone. And that's what they do with select provinces in China. They have the free economic zone so that those places can deal with the West. It might be an industrial park, it might be a city, whatever it is. And then from there, the Chinese manufacturer can go behind your back, go to one of the unfree economic zones and say, hey, we need 10 million pens, we need 10 million carburetors, we need whatever it is, make it happen. And they can make it happen. Life in China is not exactly as it is here. I dated a girl from Manchuria, which is right next to Korea, if you want to get an idea for where it is. And she told me a lot of interesting stories. Not stories, but her experiences. The first interesting thing is they look on North Koreans kind of the same way as southern United States people look on Mexicans, which is a stereotype, and it's unfortunate, but it's the exact same complaint. Oh, they come to our country illegally, they take our jobs, they are prostitutes, they're drug dealers, everything. I could have cut and pasted this conversation and put it on in Texas, and nobody would have blinked a single eyelid. She was a school teacher, but she was told, you're a school teacher. This will always be your job. You will never be a principal. You'll never be a vice principal. You'll never be a board member. You'll never be a politician. You're going to be a school teacher. That was one of the reasons why she left there, because she wanted to do more than just teach school. And right now she has a successful career, and I wish her all the luck in the world, because she's helped give me insight into that region. So imagine you're one of these people in China where the infection rates are horrendous. You're probably trapped in one of the factories. You're still being driven to produce Game Boys, I don't know, pick a random electronic object. Whatever crazy something is, somewhere there's a factory manufacturing it. And China has the ability to summon 1 billion workers potentially. 1 billion people that can put stuff together. That's a huge economic force. And China has their own new trade agreement. Fresh off the block, signed, sealed, ready to go, which the United States was invited to, but Donald Trump pulled them out of it, leaving them free to sign up with Prince Charles and his band of merry Bilderbergers as they put together Capitalism 2.0, the Great Reset. I don't know how many of you are familiar with George Orwell and the idea of manufactured conflicts, but it's interesting how Russia and India have suddenly become closer again. India is also becoming closer with French, and Russia and China are starting to grate on each other's nerves. Publicly, yes, they're declaring everything is okay, but privately, the Russians and the Chinese have had major problems since the 1950s. Originally, they couldn't agree on how to implement communism properly, and now they can't really agree how to implement anything properly. They have a lot of areas of agreement, but they've come to blows a couple times, and there have been quiet border wars. Just like right now, the Indians and the Chinese are in a standoff. This is not part of your 6 o'clock news package, but the soldiers are there. They're on guard, they're ready to go, and unlike us, if we got into a nuclear war with anybody, God forbid, we'd have about an hour to figure out what we're going to do. In the China, India, Pakistan triangle, and I call it a triangle for a reason, because India and Pakistan have a history of strife between them, and China traditionally supports Pakistan. So you got a little three-way dance there going. But those nukes would arrive within minutes. There wouldn't be enough time to do your hair. They would already be there and blowing things up. And thanks to this new trading partnership, which India also opted out of, China has all these wonderful people they can source material from. India is going to be a very interesting country to watch over the next little bit. Because if they decide to turn around and sign up with this Prince Charles Economic Capitalism 2.0 Wonder Program, Russia might not be so happy with them. On the other hand, they signed up with Russia. They're still kind of isolated from everybody, and they're going against both this Eastern super bloc that's being assembled and the Western super bloc that's being assembled. The ancient Chinese curse says, "May you live in interesting times." And here's the funny part. 2020 is interesting, but I don't think it's as interesting as what's going to come. We're in wave 2 of this pandemic. About 100 years after the Spanish flu, here we are repeating the same problems and the same mistakes. The difference is, in that 100 years, the rich got richer, and now they're stacking the deck against us. They're still going to have their economy where they leverage assets and they make billions of dollars pass as though nothing happened, while you and I argue over which of us gets to have the 10-cent raise per hour. And salaried jobs are going away, so start getting used to that. Benefits, you're joking. Benefits are a thing left over from the 1960s. The interesting thing is, and I never understand this for the life of me, I don't understand this. We have been conditioned to hate unions so much, yet you look at the professions that are getting high pay and good benefits and stuff like that, and it's not the accountants, it's not the lawyers, it's the firefighters, it's the policemen, it's the teachers, it's the athletes, it's the people that came together, and while they're technically not unions, they're professional associations, they learned how to use their collective bargaining power to say, no, as a unit, we're just going to stop you working, or yes, as a unit, we are going to continue working if we get these concessions, these demands, whatever you want to call them. Write this in our next contract, will come out to play. And just like in the 1920s, when workers were suddenly available and companies wanted them, we need to do that. The problem is, we can't go back to the economy the way it was. It wasn't working. Again, we have two economies, and our economy, the one for people like you and I, doesn't work. Money goes into that till at your burger joint, but the problem is your burger joint is a franchise. So you pay 30% of that every year to your corporate overlords. In addition, you probably rent the building. Most franchise locations will buy the building themselves and make you rent it. So you might have a very profitable franchise, be it a McDonald's, a Tim Hortons, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, but you're just renting it from the company. Sure, you get a couple franchises, you can be set for a very long time, but you are still in that corporate clutch. And looking at this new economic agreement that's going to be jammed down our throats by 2030, and that everybody is strangely on board for, and they're switching their own company policies. The United Arab Emirates is literally going from a theocratic regime and trying to remove those policies to become not quite a democratic regime, but something more open and liberal, a classical liberal sense. Someone somewhere has pulled the families together. The British royal family, the Saudi royal family, the Japanese royal family, and there's various families that are powerful but also choose to remain hidden. Remember, they don't advertise because they don't have to and they don't want to. Just like James Bond, the people in Spectre didn't tell him who they were. They just simply were. We're in for a very, very bizarre 10, 15, 20 years, and I don't know how long it's going to take. But what I suggest is everybody, wherever you are, start paying attention in January of 2021, because when the announcement comes up, what this mysterious agreement is, what these partners have agreed to, it's going to be very surreal. The website itself they did not spend a lot of money on it. It's a weforum.org website. Yeah, weforum.org. They didn't even have Capitalism 2.0 or, the restart of capitalism. They didn't buy a domain name for it. They're keeping this thing well hidden, but the information is there if you're willing to look. I don't know if I've said this before, but never take the first answer. Always inquire more, because the more you dig into something, the more you find out. And in 2021, you're going to find out whether your old buddy Silverlight is right about this. We'd like to thank you for joining for the show today. Once again, thanks to the Life Online Radio Network for hosting us. Thanks to YouTube for not banning me for another week, which is always a nice thing. And if you appreciate the show, if you have any questions, concerns, anything you'd like to raise, feel free to reach out on Twitter at Silverlight Live. That's at Silverlight Live, all lowercase. We welcome any questions you have about conspiracies, the paranormal, anything at all. If you'd like to help the show, I don't believe in giving anything away. I don't believe in forcing you to do anything, which is why I'm staying away from certain fundraising platforms. Instead, I publish books. In the comments after the websites that I'm going to give you some links. One for books that I have written, one for the book that was recently published by a close friend of mine. And that way you can help the show out. And at the same token, you get something in return, because I believe that's the way things go. I'm giving you information for free. Information should always be free, but if you wanted a nice covered book, and I write mostly fiction at the present time because reality is changing so much, it's really difficult to concentrate on a non-fiction book. I have one in the works, but it's probably going to be another 5 years before I get to it. At any rate, this is a Silverlight Show saying thank you for your attention and have a great day.